Put God first.
Your presence in their lives gives them validation.
Our children don't need us to be superheroes.
If you do these things, the next generation and the generations that follow will live in a world far better than the one we have today.
Men, stand up, be fathers.
Welcome to the Inspired Legacy Podcast. This is Season 1, Episode 1. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Henderson, your host and founder of the Inspired Legacy. Our mission, to celebrate the gift of fatherhood and equip men to lead boldly, love unconditionally, and leave a lasting legacy with the belief that we can change the world one dad at a time. On today's show, I chat with Josh Sopko. Josh is a family man, business owner, and a longtime supporter of the Inspired Legacy Initiative. He's a member of our private Facebook group, which I'll talk more about at the end of the show, and he's actually featured in some of our collateral. I've always admired Josh for his willingness and ability to lift the hood, so to speak, into his personal life and openly discuss what I think many people would otherwise consider very personal topics. And frankly, that's something that too many men struggle with. We go through struggles of life, yet we've been conditioned to keep our feelings bottled up, and that can result in some pretty tragic circumstances. But Josh is someone who recognizes that aspects of his story are actually pretty common, and many people can either relate to or have experienced themselves at some level. And he knows that by sharing his past struggles, someone out there either knows something or someone who's going through something similar, or that they could be wrestling with the same thing. And that's why this message is so important and why I'm excited to give you my conversation with Josh Sopko. Josh, thanks for joining the show today. How are you, man?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. For those listening, Josh is probably not going to be a household name for you outside of the Sioux Falls area, but he's somebody that I've known for quite a while. We live in the same town, and in fact, we've been in some Bible studies together, and so I've come to know Josh personally as well as professionally, and he's just a stand-up guy who brings a unique and very articulate message and perspective, and somebody who I knew that I wanted to have on the podcast. Thank you for your time, and really excited to kind of dive into the topics that we're going to jump into today, so thanks.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I'm very humbled and honored to be here. I was super excited when I got your message to ask me to be on this.
That's awesome. Well, again, so for those that don't know who you are, why don't you just kind of start square one? Tell us about yourself, your family, and what you got going on at home.
So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on right now with me, as you know, Mark, but I'm a 35-year-old guy. I used to be a construction worker, and a number of years ago, I just decided one cold winter day that I didn't want to do it anymore. It was a great career while I did it, but it was time for me to do something else. So I kind of just put down my hammer, and I went back to school for graphic design and worked my way through a tech school here in Sioux Falls and got my 2-year degree, my associate's degree, and taught myself how to code and build websites, and got into web and sort of graphic design, that sort of thing. And worked at a couple different agencies, but never really found a good fit for me. So eventually last year, actually, it was a year ago, just last weekend over Thanksgiving, that I quit my full-time job and started a freelance web design and development business. And so I've been pursuing that for the last year. And now just most recently, my wife and I started a retail shop here in the Empire Mall. So we've had a lot that's been going on these past couple of years, but that's kind of about me. So my wife and I have 3 kids together. I have 2 kids from a previous marriage who are 13 and 11. And then the kids that I have at home with me and my wife now are 4, 3, and just over 1. So it's a busy house.
No joke, man. And we're talking offline a little bit. Just kudos to you and your wife for having the cojones to kind of step out and take what I would call a risk and just kind of do your own thing. That's just, anybody who's willing to do that and who has done that and who is doing that, I just have so much respect for. So kudos to you guys for doing that and for doing it together. Because I think that is probably one of the keys to your success, is the fact that you guys are on the same page and she knows what you're going through and you know what she's going through and you're in it together. Am I right?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Before opening this retail store, prior to that, she didn't work. She stayed at home with the kids, and I just pursued my freelance business. So, I was gone at the office 10, 12 hours a day, and, she dealt with the kids most of the day. So I didn't know what she did, and she didn't know what I did. And so prior to starting this retail shop, we were kind of concerned about how we would be able to come together and work together and sort of manage our schedules. And like it was going to be, we were literally going to turn our marriage on its head from what we had done for the last 7 years of me working and supporting her and the family at home and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But really, we were just kind of reflecting on this last Sunday night when we were doing a budget meeting, that this opportunity that we've had, even though we don't necessarily see each other all the time, it's really brought us closer together, because now we get to experience the same things. We have a lot of the same emotions, and we're learning how to talk through them together. So it's been really interesting to see such a worry of ours actually turn into a really big positive. And I feel like we're closer and stronger for us. That's been nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to think that when you experience those highs and lows again together, that, like you said, you guys your bond grows closer.
And that's not to say there's not frustrations or
sure.
tensions sometimes that happen, but when you're able to start to recognize those feelings a little bit and say, that this isn't her fault, it's not my fault, like this really isn't our control, but here's how we can deal with it together. That's been I mean, obviously we're not perfect, but we're getting there. That's been really beneficial for us in our marriage.
Well, that's awesome. So suffice it to say, you've got a lot going on at home these days. Tell us about Josh growing up. Where are you from? Are you from Sioux Falls? I don't remember.
So I was born in Sioux Falls, and I spent the first couple years of my life in T, which is just south of Sioux Falls, about 15, 20 miles or so. But when I was 3, we moved to a house in Brookings. And that's where I kind of call home. That's where my roots are. I spent about 27 years there. So that's really where my life has been in Brookings, which is north about 60 miles of Sioux Falls. That's where I went to school. That's where I went to high school. It's where I graduated. Spent most of my construction career up there. So that's really where I'm from, I say.
Mm-hmm. And again, for those listeners out there who may not be familiar with Sioux Falls, we're talking Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Brookings, South Dakota, one of the Dakotas up north. Well, cool. So let's dive into your childhood a little bit, because I know that, again, I've spent some time with you in Bible studies, and I've heard your testimony and your story, and I've always thought it was, it always really resonated with me, not in the fact that I went through it, but just probably because of the fact that I hadn't experienced anything like that, but it really hit me kind of in the gut, and it was just really powerful, I thought. So I just kind of wanted to take some time and dive into your childhood growing up and kind of unpack that a little bit. So, what, if you could, what was your childhood like growing up?
So I think the one thing that kind of catches people off guard is when I was growing up. So we moved, like I said, to Brookings when I was 3, and I just have, the vaguest memories of things, but my dad worked as a HVAC worker. So he did, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. He didn't go to school for it. He was all self-taught, self-trained, and he had a great career. And part of our move was because he had got a new job up there to manage one of the offices up there. So he was kind of like a job foreman or a project manager or whatever.
Okay.
And so he was making a ton of money, and we moved into a condemned house at the time, which I remember my mom telling me stories about how mad she was at my dad for making us live in this condemned house. But for the next every year, we would kind of take a section of the house and basically gut it and redo it. So my childhood for the next couple of years of growing up in that house was just construction and watching my dad work with his hands and build things all day long every day.
Yeah.
And one of the memories that I have of him was I came home from school. I don't know how old I was, probably 6 maybe, but I came home from school, and here was my dad sitting on a ladder, and his head was poking up through the kitchen floor because they had gutted the whole entire floor. I mean, walls, everything, floor, and it was down to the joists. And I just remember thinking how cool that was, that my dad was basically rebuilding this old condemned house from the ground up, just with his hands. So I kind of started to idolize him. But the one thing that happened, I can't remember how old I was when it had happened, but my dad ended up being diagnosed with epilepsy.
Oh,
and
wow.
that changed who he was as a person. He lost his driver's license. He could no longer work with any power tools, so he lost his job. He had to ride his bike around. I mean, everything about what defined him as a man and really as a father
Mm-hmm.
just vanished in literally overnight.
Was that
And so he would,
the result of the disease itself, or the fact that the diagnosis prevented him from doing those things that he loved?
well, so it started with the fact that this diagnosis prevented him from doing these things. But one of the treatments, it's really not a popular treatment today. I mean, we're talking about like mid 90s is when this happened. He went in for a kind of sort of experimental brain surgery where he actually had a couple doctors from China come in.
Oh, wow.
And they removed a section of his brain. It's a section of his brain a little about the size of a small apple.
Wow.
That they physically, they opened it up and they removed it. And one funny story about my dad, they scheduled his surgery for Friday the 13th, and nobody really realized that it was Friday the 13th until it got closer. And so they kept saying, well, do you want to reschedule it? It's superstitious. Yeah, my dad says, no, it's just another day.
Yep.
But so anyways, when they removed that section of brain, it altered his personality, like physically and emotionally. That was one of the side effects that they knew was potentially going to happen to him.
Mm.
And I was at an age where I was just starting to know who my dad was, and then he had the surgery, and then he became a completely different person physically and mentally too. And so that's when everything changed in my life. Like, he was no longer the dad that I had grown up with. He was just the guy who sat in the chair and did nothing all day,
Yeah.
So that was a big change and a big deal for me. So
Absolutely. And I'm hearing some of these details for the first time. I can't even imagine. So let's say what'd you say you were around 10 years old, you thought?
I would have been 8 or 9 when
Okay, so
he had that surgery.
very, very impressionable years.
Yep.
And you go from having your dad who you knew well, and it's like somebody flipped a switch and all of a sudden he's like a different guy.
Yep. It was exactly like that.
And you're too young to really grasp what's going on, right?
Yep. I just remember the dad that used to be able to fix everything. I mean, literally, he could take apart the refrigerator and put it back together, to the dad that could, I mean, he could still do those things, but he just didn't want to anymore. Like, he wasn't the same person. And so, something would break and he'd just be like, well, call somebody to fix it. And it's like, that wasn't my dad,
Wow. Yeah. I just picture my son in that scenario, and I can't imagine how he would handle something like that. It would be devastating. It had to have been devastating for you.
I don't remember it like being devastating. I just remember like wondering what was wrong with him, not being able to grasp the surgery, until I was much later in life.
Right.
But I just remember thinking like, well, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you not doing the things that you used to do?
Yeah. So then how does that scenario play out as you get older? How does that impact you as a teen, and how does that impact the dynamics within the family?
I think I was getting used to it growing up, like just used to like, this is who he was. He didn't do anything. He didn't contribute anywhere. And I don't mean like to say that negatively against him, but it was just kind of like, he was there, he was still my dad. I loved him. We still talked and things. But what really altered everything in my life was when I was 14, I had to do the math, because I used to think I was 13, but I was 14 because I had just started driving. And I was at a Boy Scout camp, and I got a phone call saying Dad died.
Oh,
and when I heard that, it didn't register. So I thought my mom was talking about her dad, which would be my grandpa.
Yeah.
And so I had said, oh, do you want me to come home? And, looking back, like, I feel terrible about saying that, but she's like, well, yeah, like, you need to come home. And so that was really the transition point.
When did it register that it was actually your dad?
Yeah, until I got home, actually. So I was like 6 hours away.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was a big, long, like, I had to hitch a ride with a couple different people. The Boy Scouts were great at getting me home, but it was sort of a mess getting me home. The whole time I just thought, yeah, I lost my grandpa, so I have to go home, I guess. And then when I got home, my oldest brother, I have two older brothers. My oldest brother came out and met me, and he says, hey, he says, just so you know, this is our dad that died. And I was like, what? And that was the transition point for me, because I was 14, so now I'm like able to comprehend.
Absolutely.
This person is no longer here, and I had never lost anybody, so I didn't know what it meant, but I was able to understand, like, he's not coming back.
Right.
He's not going to sit on the couch anymore, and he's not just going to sit in the kitchen and smoke cigarettes and listen to Paul Harvey anymore. Like, that's not going to happen anymore. So that was a big deal for me then.
Wow. So you're 14. You've already lived with your dad, who's a totally different individual. And now all of a sudden he's gone at 14.
Yep.
How does it go ahead?
So the backstory of just the brief backstory is his epilepsy had been linked to an accident that he had in like 1976 or something. It was long before I was born. I was born in 83. And so it was long before I was even born. He had an accident, and that injury, this epilepsy that he was experiencing, had rejuvenated or had come to light 25 years later. And so the injury was on the job. And so what had happened is we sued the workman's comp for payment for all these bills, for all these brain surgeries. He had a total of 6 brain surgeries. Plus he was on every experimental epilepsy medication of the time. It was just insane. I know my mom has told me before, but it's somewhere in the $5 or $6 million of medical debt that we had at that point in time.
Unbelievable.
And so we had to sue workman's comp, and it wasn't that we had to sue workman's comp to pay for it. The interesting thing is we had to sue workman's comp to reopen his case.
Oh my goodness.
Which in the entire country had never been achieved before. Lots of people had attempted. So we were looking to set a precedent nationwide that workman's comp doesn't have the right to actually close a case forever, which is what they did. Once you had a workman's comp case and had an injury, then you would sign a paper, say, yeah, I'm fixed, I'm healed, and workman's comp is no longer liable for anything that happens in the future. And it was sort of case closed. So anyways, when he died, we hadn't finished that court case yet. And so here I am, like this young man trying to figure out who God is and like what my faith is.
Yeah.
And I've just been like learning to transition, dealing with who my dad is now as a different person, and now he's gone. So my mind instantly said, well, why did this happen? Right? Everybody wants to know, like, what the reasoning for it is. Why would God take him away? Or why would this bad, terrible thing happen to our family? And what I'd come to realize is, well, he died so that we could win our lawsuit, because now it gave us extra leverage in our lawsuit. And so a couple months had passed after his death, and we got a phone call saying, yeah, we won the lawsuit. And it was great. It set a precedent that not only did we open the case, but now all that medical debt was going to get paid for. And I thought, wow, like, this started to make sense. And then our lawyers, I remember sitting down with the lawyers and them sitting across from me saying, and also because of his death, you're now entitled to widow's benefits. And so then it just clicked. I was like, well, this is why God took him from us, so that, we were going to get a sizable sum of money plus payments for the rest of, until I was 18. My mom was going to get payments for the rest of her living life as widow's benefits. We were going to be sort of set up, Yeah. And so it just clicked in my head, and everything was great. And so then when we applied for the widow's benefits, we actually got denied. We had to go through another 2 years of lawsuits for that, and we ended up losing that lawsuit. So at this point, I was about 16. I was just under 16 years old when that decision came down from the South Dakota Supreme Court that we weren't going to get any widow's benefits and we were entitled to $0. And suddenly, to me, his death was in vain. It was worthless. It meant nothing.
Right.
And that after going all this time of saying, this is why God took my dad, and then being wrong about that, it started to really change, like, well, why then? Like, is he even real? Like, did all this, coincidence type thing happen? So
Yeah. Is God real, you mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's what became my question of faith for a really long time after that.
So how long are we talking?
Well, I remained a questionable believer for a number of years. But when I was about 20 or so is when I finally had decided that God wasn't real, or at least he didn't exist, right? And so it was at that point in time that my life had taken such dramatic turns, and I just blamed God for everything that had happened to me, that it was easier to say God's not real, God doesn't care about me, and I just kind of walked away from faith in general at that point.
So you went from, excuse me, from blaming God to then being angry at God, and then transition to the point where you didn't even believe that God was real.
Yeah.
That's quite an evolution in a relatively short amount of time.
It was, to be honest, it was painful too. It was painful to grow up with being so convinced that God took my dad to take care of us, in which that was something that I could deal with, to having that basically ripped away into questioning, like, does God even exist? To starting to say, well, if he exists, then he must not care about me. To shortly later, it resulted in a failed marriage and all sorts of other just bad things that happened. And I just blamed God for all of it. I took zero responsibility in my own life and just blamed for God for everything. And I got so angry that I told myself it's easier to accept that he doesn't exist than to accept that he doesn't care about me or he doesn't like me.
Mm-hmm. Man, Josh, I hear this story and I just think it is one that so many people, guys especially, can relate to and have probably experienced themselves. I mean, they have either made mistakes in life or things have happened to them, either being their own fault or not. And yeah, it's like, who do you get mad at, yourself or God? And I just think so many people, like you mentioned, it's just the easy thing to just get mad at God and just blame everything on God. And I know for you, you've overcome that, because I know now that you are a man of faith and you have this strong belief in God. And so how did you get from where you were after your dad died to where you are now?
So that's the interesting part of the story. So when I finally came to the realization and said, God simply doesn't exist, I knew, I mean, that's what I verbalized. That's what I told people. I was a pretty stout atheist, right? And I knew all the tricks to tell Christians as to why God's not real. Scientifically, philosophically, I could sit and have a pretty good argument for all the reasons God's not real. But I knew, even though I could say all that stuff, I knew in the deepest parts of my heart that wasn't true, which kind of made it worse. But it eventually got to the point, years and years later, I spent a decade of that lifestyle of living basically with zero faith, and lots of bad series of events happened over that course of time, over that decade. And I was working 2 jobs just to pay for my habits, I guess, if you want to say that.
Sure.
And I had met this cute little blonde girl at my part-time job, and we got to know each other pretty good. She's now my wife, but we were starting to get close together, and she grew up a Christian. She was a believer, and she had mentioned something about faith, and I just passed her off, and I said, well, what if I told you that God didn't exist? And I was getting ready to gear up into like all my, philosophical and scientific and apologetics debate style things to convince this young girl this young woman that God didn't exist. And I was going to take her faith away from her too. And it never sat right with me, but I felt like it was my duty to do that. And she gives me, the very scripted Baptist answer, like, well, I tell you all the things that God has done good in your life, and yada yada. And like, I had a hard time keeping a straight face because I was like, well, if you even knew the half, God has had very little to do in my life. Trust me.
Yeah.
But anyways, we kind of pass it off, and I was like, I'd never felt right about taking her faith away from her because it was such a part of who she was. But we got closer and closer and closer, and eventually I proposed to her and asked her to marry me, and she said yes. And like, I just thought, this is the greatest thing ever. And about a month into our engagement, she told me one night, she says, I don't think that I can marry someone that's not a Christian.
Mm.
There
it is.
I was like, great. So like, what do you do at that point?
The ultimate ultimatum.
This is the point when my life was going to change. I finally found someone who loves me for who I am, who accepts my past, who deals with all the stuff. Like, she's helping me get out of debt and manage my money. I mean, this is the perfect woman ever. And here she is telling me, because of God, the entity that I knew existed but refused to admit it, was now going to end all of that. Hmm. So it kind of rejuvenated some of those anger feelings against God. But I was left with a clear, logical decision or choice to make. I can either convince her that God's not real, or I can convince her, which already didn't sit well with me. Mm-hmm. And as well as I knew her, I didn't feel like I was going to win that because her faith was so strong. So the next logical thing is to convince her why God doesn't love me. And I felt, well, this should be pretty easy. All I got to do is look in the Bible, and I'll find right where it says, because you did this, God will not accept you.
Yep. And
I spent the next 2 months almost every night scouring the Bible, looking at my phone and trying to research, every atheist article I could find, looking for some passage or quote or verse or anything. And every time, it was at least once a week, I would find myself basically crying somewhere where she couldn't see me because I was so broken. Just at the words that God was pouring into me, and I didn't even realize it at the time.
Yeah.
Because, obviously I could never find the passage. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, where you've come from. God is there, and he'll meet you right where you're at. And so that's what began to change my faith. And then it was February of 2012. I looked it up in my Bible because I wrote it down. It was February 2012 that I sat in bed with her and I said, will you help me become saved?
Wow.
And she just kind of smiled, and we talked about it a little bit, and then we prayed a real prayer from the heart. And I was in tears and she was in tears, and we went out the next day and we bought a Bible for me, and we wrote some stuff in there and we prayed, and that's kind of when my faith was changed.
Wow, man. That is cool. That is cool. I've always been a little envious in people that can pinpoint the exact day and time of when they, made that step.
Yeah.
Mine has been more of a long-term process where I can't really pinpoint a specific day. So I got to imagine that not only did your relationship with Christ start at that point, but I have to assume the love between you and your then fiance grew exponentially.
It did. And me being the type of person I am, when I get into something, that's an all-in type of thing. I decided to start a business, so I quit my full-time job and start a business. I quit my career to go back to school.
Yep.
And so, the first thing I did as being like this new saved Christian is I need to know everything about how to be a follower of Jesus. And so we started church shopping, and we were praying together and doing all these things. And what I thought was really funny is even though my wife loved me, or my fiance at the time loved me, she ordered a dress from China online, her wedding dress, because we didn't have much money. We were bootstrapping the whole thing.
Yep.
And I didn't find this out until years later. But she told me that she would pray every night, and she left it up to God as an ultimatum. She said, if my dress shows up and it's crap, I won't marry him. And
Lord, show me a sign.
And it showed up, and it was beautiful. It was wonderfully made. She had a seamstress do some alterations to it, and the seamstress complimented her and said, "You must have spent thousands on this dress." She said, "No, it was a few $100." And the ratings on Google are like 3 out of 10.
Wow.
And so that was the moment that she knew that God had blessed our
From a country that doesn't believe in God, ironically.
Right. Yes. Yep.
Wow. Well, Josh, that's a powerful story. I think we've kind of danced around this already, but if you could, just kind of thinking back to everything you just said and your life in general, like, can you pinpoint like one or two specific things that you put in place in your life that kind of allowed you to, not only just grow in your faith journey, but overcome the loss of your dad at such a young age? I mean, can you pinpoint some specific things that people listening to this can maybe apply to their own life?
I dealt with the loss of my dad so abruptly that, I tried to make sense of it all. And then when that went to crap, and then I just blamed God for everything and really just passed the whole thing on. That whole entire experience, all that way, every time I thought about like the loss of my dad, was very painful, and I never really got over it. And it wasn't until I became a saved Christian, until I became a real child of Christ, that I started to realize it doesn't really matter why he died. I might never know why.
Yeah, you probably won't.
And I'm okay with that, because I know that God has my best intentions in his heart, and he's always looking out for me, and everything that he does is for the good, whether I ever understand that or not. And that has really helped me to deal with not only his loss, but 5 years ago, I lost my mom too. It was 5 years ago, just a couple weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
That I lost my mom. And that was right before she died, the week before we had our gender reveal party for our first baby with me and my wife. And us Sopkos, we don't have girls. We're pretty much all boys. And so we were kind of excited, but she had died. We had buried her just a couple days prior to our gender reveal party, where we found out we were going to have a girl. And that was such an emotional time, because I wanted so badly for my mom to see she was going to have a granddaughter.
Sure.
She didn't have any granddaughters, But instead of having that hurt in me, I just learned to trust that God knows what he's doing in whatever plan he's got for me, whatever plan he had for my dad, whatever plan he had for my mom, whatever plan he has for the people in our lives. I just trust that he's got the better interest in mind. And I might not ever know what that is, and I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that kind of answers your question or not, but
no, I think it does. I mean, and I think it's probably a hard answer for anybody who maybe doesn't have faith to hear, because there's a lot of pain involved, and you want to be able to place the blame on something or attribute it to something. Surely there was a reason that a terrible thing happened in my life. And like you said, sometimes you just don't know, and you may never know until you get to heaven and you get the whole story. But I think it's a key concept that we have to keep in mind when we're going through any difficult time, that your faith grows exponentially when you're going through those dark times. And the key thing is to recognize that as it's happening and lean into God's power, and he'll get you through. When we try to get through those dark times on our own, that's usually when we run into more problems, and those dark times tend to linger, sometimes for years and years. Go ahead.
I think the hard part about just our human mentality is that seems backwards.
It does, yeah.
Because it's easy to be a good Christian when life is good.
Yep.
It's easy to be thankful for the great things. And it's easy to say, oh, thanks God, like you provided me a bonus this year at Christmas so I can do all the things. And it's a lot harder to say, God, my car broke down right before Christmas. And yet I still need to be joyful and trust that you know what you're doing, and that there's a reason that this is happening, and that you're going to help me as long as I have faith. That's just so backwards in our head.
Yeah.
That it's hard to lean into it, but that's what he asks us to do all the time. And from experience, I know that it is 10 times harder to try and navigate those waters without him, to try and do it on your own.
Yep.
Because that just leads to more bad decisions and more mistakes. And from my experience, I mean, I have consequences that I'm paying for a long time in the future. So,
yeah. And I think another key thing to remember too is like the pain that we go through now, even when we do overcome it, we got to remember that our time here on earth is it's finite, and it's such a sliver of time when you think about eternal life in heaven, right?
Yes. Yep. And I think when I'm feeling at my worst, when I think life probably can't get any worse than this, which I haven't really felt that way at all, but when times are really challenging, I always look to Job in the Bible.
Yeah.
Because he, like, nobody had it worse than that guy. And,
that is a fact.
And I just think, I mean, his wife left him, and even his wife was, why don't you just get mad at God? And he was mad at God, but why don't you just renounce God and say he doesn't exist? And I said, well, because he's my creator. He, even though I'm mad at him, like, why are you doing this to me? I still believe him, and I still love him, and I still know that he's got my best interests. And so I think about that, and I think, if Job can have that faith, then so can I.
Yeah. And, to dumb it down a little bit, you think of the relationship you have with your kids. You can punish your kids for things that they've done wrong and to help steer them back on the right track. And they're going to be mad at you, but that doesn't mean they stop loving you. They might act like they don't love you, but deep down they still love you. And I think that's kind of the position Job was in. And it sounds like, kind of where you've landed as well.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, Josh, I'm just so thankful for your story and your willingness to share with the listeners. As we wrap up, I kind of want to do a fun thing, just a few rapid fire questions.
Sure.
They're kind of random. They're kind of fun, but we'll dive right in. I want to know, what's the manliest thing you've ever done?
The manliest thing I've been whitewater kayaking.
Yeah, baby.
Which is crazy fun. I've always wanted to go do it again, but I did that at Boy Scouts. I've gotten to hold a bald eagle, which is cool.
That is
there's
cool.
Nothing more manlier than putting a bald eagle on your arm.
Hashtag America.
Right. So yeah, I'd probably go with that.
Okay, that's acceptable. Name a movie that made you cry.
Ooh. Which one? There's so many. I'm such a sappy dude, Mark. You have no idea.
I do, man. As I've gotten older and my kids have grown, man, I'm turning into my mom. There have been a couple commercials that I've seen where I'm like, I'm not gonna cry.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And if you want to pick out a commercial, there's one that immediately comes to mind, and it's a Campbell's commercial of all things.
Mm-hmm.
And they bring in the parents to say, if you could go back in history and have supper with anybody, or not even if you go back in history, if you could have supper with anybody in the world, who would it be? Who you could share a meal with? And they think, they always pick out someone in history, Abraham Lincoln, or maybe some famous rock star or something like that. Well, then they bring their kids in and they ask them the same question. The parents are in the back watching this, and the kids will think about it and say, my family, or they'll say my mom or my dad. And it's just like, man, yeah. Here are these kids, 10 years old, and they just want to have supper with their family.
Yep.
They could pick anybody. They could pick any Disney princess they wanted. And yet, like, that sort of wrecks me to my core.
Yeah, I've seen that one, and it got me too. It's good.
Yes. Yep. So that's a commercial that's made me cry.
All right. Fair enough. What's something that keeps you up at night?
Oh, with all our business stuff, I could pick any number of those.
Yeah.
just finances of, paying our bills, getting to the next step of strategy with our business. That's really what keeps me up lately.
Yeah. What's one thing that brings you pure joy?
Oh, my kids, seeing them smile. just seeing them smile when I come home, or when I pick them up, or when I tell them that we're going to go do something fun, or even if I just tell them like, hey, let's play a board game, and they just light up. And my daughter, who's 4, she jumps up and down. That's the ultimate best.
Isn't that the truth? I think
Yep.
one of the best things right now in this season of life that I'm in, because I've got 2 older kids. One is grown and gone, and one has got 1 foot out the door. She's in college, and I love them dearly. And I've gone through what I'm about to describe. I went through with them as well. But my son, who's 9, I'm still his hero. I think I am anyway.
Yeah.
I can't do any wrong. And when I come home, not so much now because it's too cold out, but I would come home during the summer, and man, he would have his little toy football helmet on and his football in his hand. He's like, Dad, can we play catch? And unless I just absolutely had to do something, I just live for those moments. It's just awesome.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Final question. What is your definition of an inspired legacy?
You know, you sent this question over to me, and I've been brewing about it all weekend long. It's a loaded question, I tell you.
Mm-hmm. And I think everybody's going to answer it differently.
Yeah, I'll be really curious to hear others' responses. But kind of what I kept coming back to is the way our kids, my kids specifically, look at me and my wife operate our businesses. Right? They see us have these trials, these hard times. They see us fight, but then they see us love each other. So for me, the inspired legacy is about teaching them to never give up and to face adversity in an appropriate response. Mm-hmm. Even if that means getting mad on your first thought, but then calming down and rationally addressing the situation on your second thought. Mm-hmm. To me, like, that's what I want to leave in this world for my kids, and so that they can show their kids and they can show others that they can do whatever they want. I mean, and not the cheesy cliche, you can be whatever you want, but literally, as long as you keep pushing forward, you can do whatever you want. And that's what I want to leave for them, is that installation of just being able to make your own path in life and not let other people direct who you are or what you are or where you go.
That's good stuff, man. I love it.
Hopefully that was a good answer.
That's a good answer. I love it. Thank you so much. Josh, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of promote anything that you want to at this point. Where can people find you? What do people need to know about Josh?
So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. So I'll plug my wife's business. We have a bath and body shop at the Empire Mall. We also sell online. It's called Juniper Bath and Body, and our website is Juniper Bath. But about me specifically, I do write from time to time. And actually, as I was preparing for this podcast, I was really reflecting on the days of the dark days of my atheism, really. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote an article just last night on Medium. And I write kind of a lot of stuff, whether it be politics or just sort of emotional stuff or entrepreneurial stuff. And you can find me on Medium at Joshua Sopko. So it's JOSHUA SOPKO.
Awesome.
And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook the same way. So
very good. And we'll make sure that all gets in the show notes so people can look that up. And I know that the bath bombs that your wife makes are the bomb.
They are the bomb.
All right, man. Well, thank you again for your time. I know you're busy, and I know this went long, but I think it's just such an important message that so many people are going to be able to relate to. So again, thanks for your time, man. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I did. I think Josh really just scratched the surface of a lot of topics that we could have really dove deeper on. And so I hope to have him back and explore some of those topics in more detail. If you took anything away from this episode, would you guys do me a favor and help spread the word about the show? All you've got to do is subscribe to this podcast, leave a positive review in iTunes, and most importantly, share this episode with anyone that you think could benefit from its message. If you'd like to follow the show on social media, and I hope you will, simply visit our website at theinspiredlegacy.com. That's all one word. And towards the bottom of the page, you'll find links to our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If community is something that you're after, one that offers encouragement, support, accountability, and spiritual growth, that's exactly what you're going to find in our free and private Facebook group. Just visit facebook.com/theinspiredlegacy, then click and request access to join this small yet growing number of like-minded men. Thank you for listening to this episode. Remember, subscribe, leave a review, and share our message, because I firmly believe that when we work together to lift up fatherhood, we will change the world one dad at a time. Until next time, live inspired.